Well, well, look who just stumbled into this corner of the internet. Tell me, legend, where are you watching from? Whether it's a snowy village or a tropical paradise, I'm all ears. Drop a comment and toss this video to someone who needs a smile. Miles Whitaker lifted the centuries-old stained glass shard toward the pale winter light filtering through the cathedral's towering windows. His trained eyes caught the flaw immediately, something the untrained would have easily missed. The shade of blue wasn't genuine cobalt. Someone had swapped it out. The replacement was skillfully matched in color, but lacked authenticity and worth. A modern forgery tucked into medieval artistry. In 15 years of meticulous restoration, Miles had never encountered fraud this refined. His phone buzzed on the workbench beside him. A message from Melanie. "Working late again, don't wait up." The same message she'd sent 3 times in a single week. He set the glass fragment gently into its tray, thoughts racing, connecting inconsistencies like puzzle pieces scattered across a table. The forged, stained panel, her sudden pattern of late nights, and that strange receipt he'd glimpsed on her laptop, a rush job from Jensen Auto, listed under window tinting. Jensen, her maiden name. Miles drove home through the bleak frozen sweep of the upper Hudson Valley, passing by ice-crusted ponds and leafless trees, clawing at the dull sky like brittle bones. Their home stood solitary on a wide 12-acre spread. The barn-turned-workshop sat quietly behind it, like a dog keeping watch. From the outside, everything looked normal. But for a man who made a career of spotting microscopic flaws in ancient masterpieces, something felt undeniably out of place. Inside, he moved through the house like a guest in someone else's life. In his barn, small clues whispered at disturbance. A set of tools slightly shifted. His vintage glass cutter left beside a set of unfamiliar modern pliers. Someone had entered his sanctuary. Someone who knew the space well enough to nearly cover their tracks. Miles opened his laptop and accessed the security footage from the house's interior cameras. At first, nothing seemed off. Then, on the kitchen feed, a reflection in the microwave's door caught his attention. Melanie's outline, animated, phone on speaker, pacing and laughing. The timestamp aligned with the evening she'd claimed to be bedridden with a migraine. He ran the audio through software he typically used for enhancing sound from archival tapes. Slowly, the muffled conversation came into focus. He's too obsessed with those stupid windows to notice anything. 15 years, Richard. Maybe it's time. That barn's worth more than he thinks. Richard. Not a name that came up often anymore. Miles dug into Melanie's digitized photo albums, images she'd scanned and saved when they married nearly 20 years ago. And there he was. Richard Jensen. Her first husband. The one she'd told Miles had died in a car accident back in 2006. A chill gripped his chest, not the kind brought on by winter, but the paralyzing cold of realizing something precious had been irreversibly damaged. Only this wasn't antique glass, this was his life. For the next hour, Miles searched records, combing through databases and public archives. Richard Jensen was very much alive, it turned out, owning 3 auto dealerships in Columbia County and doing well. And Melanie? She hadn't lost him to death in 2006. She'd divorced him the year prior, in 2005. 1 year before feeding Miles a carefully constructed lie. The front door opened downstairs. Heels tapped across the hardwood floor, followed by the rustle of takeout bags. "Miles?" I picked up Ty on the way home. He shut the laptop and walked toward the kitchen, studying her as if she were an artifact under suspicion. She looked put together, elegant as always. At 43, she still had the air of someone who belonged on a magazine cover, flawless auburn hair, stylish wardrobe far outstripping the value of his entire tool set. She looked tired, but not in the way of someone weighed down by spreadsheets and deadlines. Her lipstick was freshly applied. "How was your day?" he asked. "Exhausting," she replied, eyes avoiding his. "Back-to-back budget meetings?" She moved briskly, unloading cartons of food. "How's the cathedral project going?" "Someone's been tampering with the panels," Miles said, voice level. Her hands paused mid-motion, fingers hovering over a plastic lid. "What do you mean?" "Original glass is being swapped for replicas. high-quality fakes, close enough to fool most people. "That's horrible," she said, continuing to unpack, though her rhythm had changed, less fluid, more mechanical. "Any idea who'd do something like that?" He watched her closely. "Probably someone who has access," he said. "Someone who understands the value but doesn't care about the meaning." The dishes hit the counter harder than necessary. "You always find a way, don't you?" Those were Melanie's parting words after dinner. She claimed exhaustion and went upstairs early, while Miles slipped out to his workshop in the barn. Yet her phone remained active long after, its cold blue light flickering beneath the closed bedroom door well into the night. He mentally logged it alongside a growing list of quiet red flags, indicators he'd brushed aside for too long, caught in the comfort of denial. The next morning, Melanie emerged wearing a tailored dress he didn't recognize and holding a duffel bag she insisted contained gym clothes. She gave him a peck on the cheek, said she'd be home late, and left for work. Miles waited 30 minutes, then drove to her office building in Albany. Her Lexus wasn't in the parking garage. The receptionist at the front desk informed him that Melanie had taken a personal day. Rather than feel panic, Miles experienced a familiar, clinical calm, the same mental state he entered when handling fragile restoration work. Emotion would cloud judgment. Precision, on the other hand, would illuminate the truth. He pulled out his phone and dialed Thomas Elder, an old college friend. Once an insurance investigator, Thomas now specialized in genealogical research. "Tom, I need your help," Miles said. "Discreet background check." "Work-related or personal?" "Both," Miles replied. "Name's Richard Jensen. He owns Jensen Auto Group out in Columbia County." There was a pause, longer than usual. "Miles, why him?" "You know him?" "I know of him. Big fish in a small pond. Still walks like he's captain of the football team. Has a thing for married women, if you get my meaning." "What are you really looking for here?" Thomas asked, his tone guarded. Miles didn't answer right away. "I'm investigating a potential fraud case," he finally said. "All right, I'll dig around. Give me till tomorrow." That night, Melanie returned home in an unusually buoyant mood. She asked about his restoration project with what sounded like genuine interest. But the timing, the tone, it all felt rehearsed. Miles remained pleasant, but studied her closely. When he casually brought up a separate case involving insurance fraud and stolen artifacts, her demeanor subtly shifted. "You're not putting yourself in danger, are you?" she asked. "Art theft rarely involves armed guards," he replied evenly. Still, her eyes lingered on him, more wary than concerned. The next day, Thomas called back with preliminary information. Jensen was alive, single, and had 2 prior divorces behind him. His business was profitable, though heavily in debt. But what caught Thomas's attention was this. Jensen had been seen multiple times at the Riverside Motel on Route 9, always arriving with the same companion, a red-haired woman driving a blue Lexus. Melanie, of course, drove a blue Lexus. That afternoon, Miles covertly placed miniature GPS trackers in her purse and vehicle, devices barely larger than a fingernail, easily purchased online. If she was meeting with Jensen, he wanted undeniable proof. The trackers activated on Thursday. Her phone claimed she was at the office, but her car's GPS signal placed it at the Riverside Motel between 2 and 5 p.m. Miles drove out there, positioning himself somewhere he could observe without being noticed. Her car was parked right next to a black Mercedes he recognized from Jensen Auto's online listings. Through a gap in the motel curtains, he saw 2 figures in a close embrace. 15 years of marriage, and she was spending her afternoon in a roadside motel with the man she had once told him was dead. Miles took photos of both vehicles' license plates, then quietly left. Oddly, there was no fury, only a distant ache, like watching a centuries-old window pane finally crumble after too many harsh winters. Painful, yes, but also inevitable. When he returned home, their daughter Raina was in the kitchen, assembling a sandwich before her evening shift at the movie theater. Now 17, she had Melanie's auburn hair but moved with Miles's quiet precision. She glanced up from the counter. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you and Mom okay?" Miles studied her expression. Why do you ask? She's been acting off. Super secretive. And she told me not to tell you if anyone called asking about her. Did she say who might call? Raina hesitated. No names. But she seemed scared. Something clicked inside Miles, like the last piece of a puzzle finally snapping into place. She'd been getting phone calls she doesn't want me to hear? Even in bitter cold, she would sometimes step outside just to take a call. Miles had sensed the unease building for some time. His daughter clearly had sensed it too. But for how long had she been protecting him from what she already knew? Raina, he asked softly, if I needed you to be completely honest about something important, could you do that for me? She gave a small, serious nod. How long have you suspected your mother hasn't been telling the truth? The question hung in the silence between them like a delicate thread. Tears welled up in Raina's eyes. Since last summer, she said in a whisper. I saw her car parked outside that motel near the highway. She told me she was at work that day. Her eyes dropped, guilt written all over her face. I didn't know what to do. A surge of fierce protection flared up inside Miles. His daughter had been shouldering this knowledge alone. You didn't do anything wrong, he told her gently. Sometimes adults make choices that end up hurting the people who love them most. Are you going to divorce her? She asked. The bluntness of it called for a truthful answer. I'm not sure yet, he said after a moment. But whatever happens, you and I will be all right. That night, long after the house went still, Miles lay in bed awake, planning what to do next. Beside him, Melanie slept soundly, her breathing steady, completely undisturbed, untouched by guilt. He wondered how long she'd been living this double life, how many nights she'd returned from Richard Jensen's embrace to crawl beneath the same covers, feigning normalcy. On Friday morning, Thomas called with troubling news. Jensen's business dealings were shady. Cars sold without legal ownership, insurance claims filed for fictitious damages, deposits taken for vehicles that never existed. He's skating on legal ice, Thomas said, but he's well connected. Knows who to call. Politicians, cops, judges, you name it. Small-town favors keep him safe. What about his personal life? That's where it gets more interesting, Thomas replied. Neighbors say there's a steady stream of women coming and going, but he always tells people he's single. Oh, and rumor is, he's recently reconnected with one of his ex-wives. Miles felt a cold, familiar weight settle in his chest. Which ex-wife? Name's Melanie. They were high school sweethearts. Got married young, didn't last. She supposedly remarried some quiet guy and moved out to the valley. The quiet guy. Miles nearly laughed at the irony. Tom, he said carefully, I need your help. And this has to stay between us. What kind of help? I need documentation, photos, proof. Can you handle surveillance? Thomas paused. Miles, what's going on? My wife's been seeing Jensen behind my back. I don't know how long it's been happening, but I need evidence before I make my next move. God, Miles, I'm sorry. Don't be. Just help me get the facts. They met that Saturday morning at a cafe near the cathedral, where Miles had been restoring antique glasswork. Thomas came prepared, with cameras that could zoom from half a block away, directional microphones and GPS trackers more sophisticated than anything Miles had ever used. Once an insurance investigator, always one, Thomas said with a grim smile. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. They mapped out their approach. Thomas would handle tracking movements, while Miles monitored messages and online activity. Their objective was clear: trace the meetings, gather recordings, and compile undeniable evidence of both the affair and any potential financial improprieties. Eventually, Thomas looked at him and asked, What's your endgame here? Miles sat with the question for a moment. Was it justice? Revenge? Closure? I want her to understand there are consequences for betrayal. By Monday morning, Melanie had casually announced she'd be working late all week. Something about critical project deadlines. Miles offered a supportive smile even as he quietly alerted Thomas to prepare for long evenings of surveillance. By that afternoon, Thomas had results. She met up with Jensen in Saratoga Springs, he reported. Upscale spot, candlelit dinner. They looked like two people on a romantic getaway. They weren't exactly subtle. Public displays, holding hands, kissing in the parking lot. Then they split up for show, only to reconnect at a boutique hotel. They're not bothering to hide it, Thomas added. At least not from strangers. Miles felt something cold and decisive settle inside him. She wasn't concealing the affair anymore. Not really. She was flaunting it, confident he was too naive to notice. Then Tuesday arrived, with news that was even worse. Thomas had recently caught sight of Melanie and Richard at a real estate office, the two of them poring over property listings as if making serious plans. They spent close to 2 hours with an agent, behaving unmistakably like partners scouting for a home. "Miles," Thomas said later, "this doesn't look like just a fling anymore. I think they're preparing to start a life together." That evening, Miles chose a careful approach. Rather than accuse, he decided to feel her out. "So," he began casually, "how's that big work initiative going?" Melanie gave a weary little smile. "It's been tough. A lot of moving parts to manage. Is there anything I can do to support you?" he asked. She blinked, surprised. "Support me? With what, exactly? You seem under a lot of stress lately." "I just thought maybe I could help lighten the load." For a moment, a softness returned to her features, a flicker of the woman he'd once loved. "That's sweet of you, Miles," she replied gently. "But no, it's something I need to handle myself." Her tender voice only made it worse. She wasn't cruel. She was simply someone who had chosen another man and lacked the courage to end her marriage with dignity. By Wednesday, Thomas returned with damning evidence. He had tailed them to a neighborhood bank, where they'd sat down with a mortgage officer. Official records revealed what Miles feared. Melanie and Richard had jointly applied for a home loan. "They're leveraging your marriage," Thomas said grimly. "Your reliable income, her job track record, the equity you've built in the house. It's all being used to secure this loan." At that moment, the last strand of emotional connection Miles still felt toward Melanie was cut clean. This wasn't just emotional infidelity. It was calculated financial betrayal. "And there's more," Thomas continued. "I did a deeper background check on Jensen. The guy's a walking liability. His dealerships are collapsing. He's defaulted on several loans. Rumors are flying, customer money missing, shady operations." Thomas hesitated, then added, "He's using Melanie to get to your assets." Miles felt a sick twist in his gut. "What kind of access are we talking about?" "Your home's worth a lot. And your barn, those antique tools, that rare stained glass. It's all valuable. If Melanie's been tracking what you own, they may be planning to liquidate it." That's when the pieces snapped into place. The tools that had disappeared. Her new fascination with his studio. All those questions she'd asked about insurance coverage and valuations. "She's been cataloging my inventory," he muttered. Thomas nodded grimly. "That's my assumption. Jensen's desperate. She's showing him where to find the money." That night, Miles did a full sweep of his workshop. It didn't take long to spot the gaps. Several valuable, though not top-dollar, items were missing. Specialty glass tools, vintage cutters, and completed panels he had meticulously crafted and stored. Melanie had been slowly and silently looting his life's work. Infidelity was one wound. This was something far more sinister. It didn't call for mourning. It called for action. On Thursday, Miles buried himself in legal research. He read through case law on asset protection, financial fraud, and the admissibility of evidence related to extramarital misconduct. He also began compiling a detailed profile on Richard Jensen's failing finances. Behind the luxury cars and tailored suits, Miles discovered a man drowning in liabilities, failed ventures, impulsive spending, and a reputation held together by arrogance and loans. By Friday morning, Miles had formulated a comprehensive plan. First, he separated their finances, transferring money from joint accounts into personal ones and recording every move with precision. It was a clean, lawful disengagement, silent but decisive. Second, he changed the locks on his workshop and installed new security cameras across the property. If Melanie or Richard wanted back in, they'd have to break the law. Third, he began assembling a bulletproof archive, photo documentation, transaction records, GPS data, and inventory logs. A meticulous file built for court. And finally, he outlined a backup plan, a nuclear option designed to simultaneously obliterate Melanie's public reputation and send Richard's fragile empire into collapse. That evening, Melanie came through the door with nervous energy. She moved sharply, spoke tensely, every gesture coated in unease. She had gone outside intending to enter the workshop, only to find the barn door firmly locked. "Why can't I get into the barn?" she demanded, her tone edged with irritation. "I upgraded the locks," Miles replied calmly. "There have been a few thefts nearby. Plus, I need to take inventory for the insurance company." He kept his eyes on her and added, "Insurance?" She hesitated, clearly caught off guard. "Just updating the policy, making sure everything's up to date and secure." "I've always handled the insurance," he said, studying her face carefully. A faint redness bloomed on Melanie's cheeks. "Regardless, I should have access to all parts of the property." Miles repeated her words deliberately. "The property. Interesting that you called it ours." The way her posture shifted betrayed her awareness of the mistake. "You know that's not what I meant," she mumbled. "Is that so?" Miles said softly. "Lately, I'm not sure what you mean anymore." Early Saturday, Thomas called with urgent news. He'd seen Richard Jensen at his car dealership, in tense conversation with several sharply dressed men. "Could be collectors, could be investors," Thomas said. "But whatever the case, Jensen's in trouble." That meeting wasn't friendly. They were laying down an ultimatum. Suddenly, it all clicked. Melanie and Richard weren't merely fantasizing about a life together, they were plotting an exit strategy, and they intended to bankroll it, using what Miles had built. It was time for Miles to act. Later that same day, he drove out to Jensen's primary dealership, a modern showroom, slick and overconfident, filled with glossy cars and hollow bravado. He spotted Richard right away. The man still had the broad-shouldered look of a former athlete, but time and ease had worn down the edges. Miles wandered the floor slowly, pretending to be interested in the vehicles while quietly analyzing Richard's behavior. He carried himself with charm, the type honed from years of sales and bluster, but the cracks were obvious. Constantly checking his phone, snapping at staff, faking interest in clients. Stress had a way of loosening masks. "Can I help you find something?" came a voice behind him. Miles turned. Richard was standing there, having snuck up unnoticed. Face to face, Jensen looked less impressive. The fancy suit couldn't conceal the fatigue in his eyes or the arrogance that distorted his face when he thought no one noticed. "Just looking," Miles replied, voice flat. "I'm Dick Jensen," the man said with smooth rehearsal. "This is my place." "What kind of car are you looking for?" Miles met his gaze. "Something reliable. I'm tired of dealing with people who talk a big game but don't follow through." Jensen's confident smile wavered. "Well, you've come to the right lot. Everything here has my personal stamp of approval." "Perfect," Miles said quietly. "I've run out of patience for liars." Richard narrowed his eyes. "Have we met before?" "Don't think so," Miles answered coolly. He didn't give his name, just turned and walked away. There was no need to say more. He'd already seen everything he needed. Jensen was exactly the man Miles had imagined, puffed up with false pride, straining to maintain control over a life already slipping out of reach. Sunday evening, Melanie brought it up over dinner. She'd be out of town all week for a company event in Albany and would be staying at a hotel near the airport to avoid the drive. "What hotel?" Miles asked casually. "The Hampton Inn," she replied. "The one next to the terminal." He nodded, giving no indication of suspicion, though he made a mental note of every word. Thomas would check the hotel records soon enough, but Miles had his doubts. Chances were Melanie wouldn't be anywhere near Albany. More likely, she'd be with Richard, plotting their next move. By Monday morning, with Melanie gone and her suitcase in the trunk, Miles moved forward with the next step. He dialed the regional office where she claimed to work and asked for her, saying it was a family emergency. After several transfers and delays, someone finally gave him a straight answer. Melanie hadn't been reporting for work at all. She'd been on personal leave for weeks. Every day she claimed to be commuting to the office had been a carefully constructed lie. Miles contacted the Hampton Inn to check for any reservations under either Melanie Whitaker or her maiden name, Melanie Jensen. There were none. Soon after, Thomas reported back he had spotted Melanie's car parked in Richard's driveway on Monday night. She wasn't even trying to conceal the affair anymore. She had effectively moved in with Richard, fully assuming Miles would stay in the dark. On Tuesday, Miles drove out to the cathedral where he was engaged in a meticulous restoration project. The sacred stillness of the sanctuary offered a brief reprieve from the chaos of betrayal and deceit. He immersed himself in restoring centuries-old stained glass, carefully repairing the damage left by time and negligence. The irony wasn't lost on him. His profession was about restoring what others had broken. But not every fracture was meant to be fixed. Some damages were too deep to heal. His phone buzzed with a message from Melanie. "Conference is going well. Miss you." Miles erased it without responding. Wednesday brought another troubling update from Thomas. He had spotted Richard unloading boxes from his car into a rental storage unit. From what he observed, the items resembled antique tools and fragments of glass, possibly pieces Miles had worked with or owned. "They're converting your materials into cash," Thomas warned. "They're not just skipping town, they're financing their escape with your inventory." A strange sense of icy composure settled over Miles. This wasn't only infidelity. It was orchestrated robbery. Later that night, the local police reached out. A neighbor had reported unusual activity near his workshop. Someone had seen a vehicle parked there after dark. "Did you authorize anyone to be on your property last night?" asked Officer Martinez. "No," Miles replied, "but I've installed security cameras. I'll check the footage." The surveillance video was clear. Richard's Mercedes sat behind the workshop at 11 p.m. Two people were seen approaching with flashlights. They tried the door handles, lingered, then left after failing to get inside. Miles turned the footage over to law enforcement and made several backup copies. Attempted burglary would now be added to the long list of their offenses, joining theft and infidelity already documented. By Thursday morning, Miles resolved to confront Melanie directly. "So how's Albany?" he asked casually. "Still here for the conference?" "The talks are incredibly boring," she replied. "That's too bad," he said. "I was thinking I'd drive up and take you out to dinner." The silence that followed was telling. "Tonight's tricky," she eventually said. "We've got a team dinner scheduled." "Oh? At which restaurant in the Hampton Inn?" he asked. Another pause. "Actually, we're going to a place nearby." "Really? What's it called? Maybe I'll make a reservation for us tomorrow." I forget the name. Sarah picked it." "Sarah from your department?" "Yes, that Sarah." But Miles knew all of her co-workers. There was no Sarah. "Well," he said flatly, "enjoy dinner with Sarah." He hung up, feeling grim satisfaction settle in. She was unraveling. Each lie brought her one step closer to collapse. On Friday, Thomas called again, this time with damning intel. "You'll want to see this," he said. He had tailed Richard to a shady transaction. Rough-looking men, a cash exchange, and tense body language. "Looked like he was repaying a debt," Thomas noted. "He's in deep." "Loan sharks?" Miles guessed. "That's what it looked like," Thomas confirmed. "But there's more." He had managed to record a conversation between Richard and Melanie afterward. Jensen had told her they needed to speed things up. Time was running out. Suddenly everything aligned. They weren't just having an affair. They were preparing to vanish. Soon, possibly that very weekend. Miles understood the urgency. It was time to end this. That Friday night he sat down and quietly began assembling every piece. Bank records, digital trails, surveillance footage, text logs. He built a flawless case, a complete dossier. When the hammer fell, it would land with finality. There would be no escape. Before doing anything else, Miles knew one thing for certain. He needed to confront them directly. That Saturday morning, he pointed his car toward Richard Jensen's oversized, tasteless mansion in the suburbs, a bloated caricature of wealth that screamed extravagance without elegance. Sitting side by side in the driveway were two unmistakable symbols of betrayal, Melanie's Lexus and Richard's polished Mercedes-Benz. Miles approached the front steps and rang the bell. When the door finally opened, Richard appeared, visibly disoriented. His silk designer sleepwear and bedmussed hair made it clear he hadn't been expecting company. "What do you want?" Richard asked, his voice laced with annoyance. "I'm here to speak with my wife," Miles said evenly. Richard blanched. "I don't know who you're talking about." "I think you do," Miles replied. "Melanie, my wife, the woman who's been crashing here under the lie that she's out of town on business in Albany." Inside the house, a voice called out, tinged with nervous tension. "Richard, who is it?" Miles raised his voice, ensuring she heard him. "It's your husband. The man who's unknowingly financed your affair for 15 years. Melanie appeared in the hallway, wrapped in a silk robe he didn't recognize. Her face registered shock, shame, and a flicker of something else. Maybe relief. "Miles, I can explain," she began. "Can you?" he asked coolly. "You mean explain how you've been sneaking tools out of my workshop? Or how you used our marriage to back dodgy loans? Or maybe you'll tell me why you said your ex-husband was dead while sneaking off to motel rooms with him?" Richard stepped in then, voice tight with anger. "You need to leave. This is private property." Miles didn't budge. "Private, huh? Paid for with money you stole from customers at your failing car dealerships?" Richard's expression darkened, his mouth tightened, jaw rigid. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying," Miles shot back. "I've seen the doctored titles, the faked insurance paperwork, the missing deposits. I know about the meeting you had yesterday, with the men you owe, and I know you're planning to pay them off with my stolen inventory." Melanie and Richard shared a tense glance, their silence screaming louder than words. "Miles," Melanie said gently, "can we please talk, just us?" "There's no need," he replied. "The three of us are here, and the pretending is over. I have everything I need." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through it, revealing photos, intimate snapshots of Melanie and Richard at hotels, restaurants, even touring homes together. GPS logs tracked her movements. Bank records traced the flow of money. "For a decade and a half," Miles said, voice unwavering, "you've lied to me. Was any of it real? Or was I just a convenient cover for the life you really wanted?" Tears welled in Melanie's eyes. "It wasn't supposed to end like this." "No?" he asked bitterly. "Then what was the plan? Drain everything I've built and vanish, leaving me to wonder what I did wrong?" Richard cut in, exasperated. "Come on, man. These things happen. People grow apart. You can't expect someone to stay when it's over." Miles turned toward him, his stare sharp. "You're right. I can't make anyone stay married, but I can make sure the world sees you both for who you really are." From inside his coat, he pulled a heavy manila envelope. "This contains it all. Bank statements, surveillance photos, audio recordings, even police documentation. And duplicates are already en route to your investors, her employer, your families, and the press." Richard's face drained of color, then he lunged forward. Miles simply took a measured step back. "Lay a hand on me," he warned, "and you'll be adding assault to your list, right next to fraud and adultery." Seething, Richard snarled, "You smug little bastard. You really think you're better than the rest of us? Hiding out in your barn, playing with broken glass? Melanie's been mocking you for years. She thinks you're pathetic. Always has." The words were meant to wound, but Miles felt no pain, only a cold, uncanny clarity. Richard had finally dropped the mask. "She said you barely even speak anymore," Richard remarked with a smug grin. "Told me you're more interested in patching up old glass than keeping your marriage intact." He added with mock sympathy, "Being married to you, according to her, was like sharing a house with a ghost." Miles slowly turned toward Melanie, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Is that really what you told him?" She couldn't meet his gaze. Her eyes dropped to the ground. "Miles, please, let me explain." "Oh, I get it," he cut her off, voice hardening. "You wanted to leave, but didn't have the guts to come clean. So instead, you've been juggling two lives, bleeding me dry to fund the one you actually care about, planning to disappear with the money we built together." That's not how it was, she murmured, barely audible. Then tell me, he said firmly. Help me understand what it was like. She hesitated, groping for something to say. We have a history. Richard and I. There's something between us that never really went away. It just resurfaced. We understand each other. Miles didn't flinch. You understand each other so deeply that you've been running a con together? Richard stepped closer, stiff and self-righteous. You've said enough. Get off my property. Miles met his glare with icy calm. It won't be yours much longer. He let the words settle like a storm cloud before continuing. I contacted your mortgage provider this morning. Seems there are a few inconsistencies in your paperwork. They're quite eager to dig into your accounts again. Richard paled. You had no right. I already did, Miles said coolly, and the Attorney General's office has been briefed. They're now looking into the vanishing deposits from your car dealerships. Then he shifted his gaze to Melanie. And your boss? They know all about the insurance racket you've been playing a part in. They're worried. Really worried. Public image and all. Melanie's voice trembled. You're destroying everything. No, Miles replied without emotion. I'm just shining a light on what you've spent years hiding. That's not the same thing. He turned and headed toward his car. Before getting in, he paused and looked over his shoulder. Oh, and Raina knows, he said quietly. She's known about this since last summer. She didn't tell me because she was trying to protect me. Melanie flinched like she'd been slapped. She sees you for what you are now, a liar, a cheat, Miles added. She's moving in with me. For good. You can't just take her from me, Melanie cried, her voice cracking. I'm not taking her, Miles replied evenly. She's choosing to live with the parent who didn't spend years lying to her. Without another glance, he stepped into his car and drove off, leaving them standing in front of a house that would likely be foreclosed on before the month ended. By Sunday morning, Miles sat in his lawyer's office, laying out everything, every document, every lie, every trace of deceit. He was filing for divorce, locking down his finances, making it official. The attorney flipped through the pile of paperwork. This is quite the collection, he said, eyebrows raised. Affair, fraud, stolen property, collusion. You've got grounds for both civil suits and criminal prosecution. I want them to feel what they've done, Miles said firmly. The lawyer studied him. They will. But this is a total takedown. Are you certain you want to go all the way? This won't leave them much. Miles thought of the years lost to deception, of Raina bearing the weight of secrets no child should carry, of the nights spent with a wife already preparing her exit. I'm certain, he said. On Monday morning, everything went into motion at once. Packages were dispatched. Richard's business partners received damning proof of financial misconduct. Melanie's employer got a thorough breakdown of her role in the insurance fraud. And select reporters received a dossier detailing the affair, the misappropriated funds, and the web of deceit connecting it all. By noon, both Melanie and Richard were overwhelmed with incoming calls. Tuesday brought the hammer down. State investigators raided Richard's dealerships. By day's end, Melanie was dismissed from her job. And by the close of that week, both of them were officially under investigation for fraud and embezzlement. On Wednesday, Miles's phone lit up. Melanie's name appeared on the screen. Her voice wavered, saturated with panic. Miles, please, she pleaded, her words rushed and raw. I'll end things with Richard. I'll come home. I'll make it right. His tone was composed but firm. That window closed a long time ago. She grasped for hope. But what about Raina? She still needs her mother. He didn't flinch. What Raina needs is someone she can admire. You stopped being that a long time ago. Her voice dropped to a hush. I know I've done wrong, but I love her. And I love you. He felt no warmth, only a cold vacancy inside. Then you don't really understand love. Love is rooted in truth, in loyalty, in putting your family ahead of your impulses. I can change, she insisted. I can learn to do better. He shook his head gently, voice low. No, Melanie. This is your true self. It always has been. By the next day, headlines reported that Richard Jensen had vanished, leaving unpaid bills and angry clients in his wake. His dealerships had abruptly shut down, with customers demanding refunds for phantom cars they had paid deposits on. Multiple law enforcement agencies were now hunting him down. Melanie was left adrift, no job, no partner, and looming legal trouble. On Friday evening, she arrived at Miles's door. Her appearance was a reflection of her downfall, pale, disheveled, and emotionally spent. I need to see Raina, she said softly, barely louder than a whisper. Can I come inside? Miles looked at her with unreadable calm. She doesn't want to see you. She's my daughter, Melanie said, her voice rising in defiance. Then maybe you should have remembered that before spending 15 years lying to her, he said, his tone quiet but cutting. As he began to close the door, she leaned forward, pressing her hand against it. This house is mine too, she snapped. Not anymore, Miles replied evenly. I had your name removed from the deed yesterday. The paperwork went through easily, given the fraud. Her mouth parted in disbelief. You can't do that. I've got nowhere else. He studied her, the woman he once believed he'd spend his life with, and felt only pity. You should have thought of that before you tried to rob me blind with your lover, he said calmly. Her voice cracked. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore, he said, closing the door on her, and on a marriage built on 15 years of betrayal. He locked it. The chapter was over. The following week, Miles returned to his restoration work at the cathedral, immersing himself in the quiet rhythm of rebuilding stained glass. His hands moved carefully over the ancient panels, coaxing brilliance back from centuries of erosion. Raina, now living with him permanently, adjusted quickly. There was a peace in her now, as though the silence had lifted and taken its weight with it. One evening, as the two of them cleaned tools side by side in his workshop, she spoke without looking up. Dad, she said softly, I'm proud of you. For not backing down. He met her gaze, his expression tender. I'm sorry you had to go through all of that. She gave a small smile. I'm not. It taught me something. Yeah? What's that? That some people prefer lies that feel safe over truths that hurt. But we don't have to live like that. His chest tightened at her words. He gave a quiet nod. No, he said, we don't. A month passed, and word reached him that Richard Jensen had been apprehended in Florida, caught trying to offload stolen vehicles. He now faced federal charges for transporting stolen goods across state lines, along with numerous fraud accusations in New York. Melanie, meanwhile, had taken shelter at her sister's home in Vermont. She was waiting tables and hoping to negotiate a plea deal to avoid jail time. Miles felt no satisfaction, no sense of justice served, just a muted peace, knowing the deception had collapsed under its own weight. One icy morning in February, he stood alone in the cathedral, bathed in the multicolored light of the restored glass. The windows shone in the winter sun, vibrant and alive despite their age and scars. A tour group moved quietly through the space, led by a guide who spoke with reverence. These panels were almost lost, the guide explained, but thanks to careful restoration, they've been revived. The cracks you see, they're part of the story now. Each one allows a bit more light to pass through, even if not every break can be repaired. Miles packed up his tools and stepped into the cold, leaving the luminous glass behind him, glass that would outlast his presence. Some breaks, he thought, are meant to illuminate, and some were never meant to be mended.